Recording is now in progress. Okay, so welcome back to Get a Job in Publishing Day 2. Thank you very much for coming back. Very nice to to have you with us again, even though I can't see any of you, but that's absolutely fine. So today is Editors Day. So we've got a fantastic trio of editors from Pan Macmillan who are going to talk us through what editorial careers are like and the joys and challenges and all the interesting work that they have to do. Just before we start, I am going to just quickly cover, we've got a couple of really interesting questions coming through from Slido. So just to remind you, it'll be excellent if you go onto Slido. You should have the details already. I'll show them to you again in a second. Go onto Slido and either ask a question of your own or sort of upvote a question from somebody else. So just very quickly, Cassie, you've asked about a breakdown of editorial roles, assistant, executive, etc. One of the speakers today is going to do that for you. Career progression in publishing, I'm probably going to keep that for, there's a Q&A section on Thursday night, which I'm going to address that in. Cassie, you've asked another question here, which is, do agents work within publishing houses? No, they don't. They're separate entities and they sell to publishing houses. And when they do auctions with them, they are generally not physical. They all occur over email, and it's just successions of emails and phone calls and stuff like that. Lots of back and forth. We'll hopefully be able to go into that in a little bit more detail later on. What's the difference between a copy editor and a proofreader? To be honest, I've always found this quite confusing. That is going to be addressed today as well. And Nadine, your question about advice for people from the EU who want to work in publishing in the UK, we're going to try and get to that on Thursday as well. So, right, bear with me 1 second while I get my slides together, because we should be on this anyway. So that's that. So yeah, please do put in questions in the Slido. Also, we had a little bit of a hiccup yesterday with the sharing of documents with those 3 Pan Macmillan acquisitions, those title documents. You've all had those now. You don't need to use them at all today, but please make sure you've read those documents so that you know those 3 books, the adult fiction, adult non-fiction, and children's books for tomorrow's session. Because in tomorrow's session, we're going to be talking about sales, marketing, and publicity. And there's going to be a breakout session at the end in which you're going to be discussing with one another how you're going to promote the books that you've acquired, you know, what the right retail channels are, the right media, etc., etc. So do read those documents. Okay, so today we are talking about editorial. We've got to start with a fiction editor and then a non-fiction editor, and finally 2 children's editors. So without any further ado, I'm going to ask Chris Doyle to share video and to unmute. So Chris Doyle is the editorial director of Picador. And I realized I was a little bit uncertain whether we call Picador an imprint or a division. Maybe you can clear that up for me, Chris. And I will leave it to you to introduce yourself and tell us what you do, and generally explain to us a little bit about the life of a fiction editor. Over to you.
Hi, thanks, James, for that introduction. Can you see me and hear me okay? Great, excellent, fantastic. Very briefly, I'm sure most of you don't really care that much, but Picador used to be an imprint, and now we're probably sort of more akin to a division, because we also have another imprint called MCB, which is Macmillan Collectors Library, which feeds into what Picador does. So we have been one thing and are now sort of another. Anyway, hi, my name is Chris. I'm an editorial director at Picador, which is one of the imprints at Pan Macmillan, or division, if you will. And I've worked here for about 12 years and published fiction and non-fiction, but today I'm going to talk to you about what it's like to be a fiction editor, and about the kinds of people it might be a good job for, and about some of the joys and challenges of the job. So before I get into what it's like, please remember that I'm I'm speaking to you from my experience, which is 12 years of working here, part of one of the UK's biggest publishers. It's possible that other people would present the life of a fiction editor differently, but I've tried to give a kind of good overview of things that would be consistent, whether you work at the biggest corporate publisher or whether you work at a small indie, and whatever genre of fiction you were to publish. So the first thing I want to say about publishing is that you have to remember it's a job and a commercial enterprise. And there are loads and loads of cool things about this job. And, we'll talk about some of those later. But if we don't make money, none of that cool stuff can happen. So in general terms, I like to think about the job as a business. So I work for a company, and my job is to invest their money in publishing different works of fiction in such a way that we make a return on that investment. There are different kinds of returns. You can make money, literally turnover, you can make profits, you can boost the company's reputation by publishing a bestseller or winning a prize or doing something good. There are lots of different ways to make that return, but that's the core of your job. Then I think of the job as having three primary functions. So I consider those being acquisition, editing, and publishing new works of fiction. So acquisition, the first part, basically involves reading a huge number of manuscripts, something like 250 a year probably, and in conjunction with your colleagues deciding which of those manuscripts we want to invest the company's time and money in publishing. That's the kind of investment I was just talking about. Most of those here come from literary agents, and I hope you heard a bit about how that works yesterday, and talked about the acquisitions process, so I'm not going to do that. The second part of the job is the editing part, and that's the process of working to take a draft manuscript to a published book. So that involves working very closely with the author on the creative editing. So that's big things like talking about plot or talking about character, talking about structure, and you can have really big creative conversations at this point. So maybe it would be better if it had a different ending. If it's a romance, should they get together or not, or maybe a character or a whole plot strand would, maybe that could disappear and the whole book would come together better. Or maybe it could be narrated in the present tense instead of the past tense. So you have these very big conversations, but what you're ultimately trying to do is help the author write the best version of their book. It's not your book, and you're really, really trying to help them produce the best version of the text that you can. And the next stage is that you then get more and more granular as you go through the process, working with copy editors and proofreaders as well. And that's improving things like the spelling and punctuation and grammar of the text, and checking the consistency, and basically getting every tiny little detail right, every correction made until you've got the absolute best version of the words to put into print. And of course, that's the book that you read, if you buy it in the bookshop. The third part of the job is the publishing part, and that's basically a project management role. And one half of that is that you're the conduit between the author and the agent, if they've got one, and the publishing house. So there's a lot of liaison back and forth involved there. And then the second part is that you work with your colleagues in the publishing house in loads and loads of different departments to make decisions about how to make the product, so the book or the ebook or the audiobook or the picture book or whatever, that you're going to sell, and then you try and sell that to as many readers as you possibly can. So those conversations are things like, what should this cover look like, and how do we describe it on Amazon so as to entice as many readers as possible? And there are also practical things like you have to get the thing to print on time so that it's in the warehouse and ready to deliver to the bookshops on publication day. You have conversations about what kind of paper it's printed on, whether it's a hardback or a paperback, that kind of thing. So that's the sort of three parts of the fiction editor's job. And then the structure of the job as it develops. Basically, there are loads of different job titles. Somebody asked a question about this, starting from editorial assistant, assistant editor, commissioning editor, senior commissioning editor, editorial director, publishing director, publisher. There are all these different jobs, and every company has a different set of titles. What I suggest you do is sort of forget about that, really. There are four key stages in a fiction editor's life. You're some kind of an assistant helping someone else on their list. You're a commissioning editor. You're responsible for choosing which books you publish. You're a publisher. which essentially is like weird because it's the job title is the same as the organization, but a publisher is a person who runs a list or an imprint or a group of commissioning editors. And then you're a management person, so kind of MD, CEO, something above that level. And that's basically the life you can have. Those are the 4 steps in my view. So don't worry too much about titles, but that's the kind of the key progression. And so day to day, the job is really different and develops in different ways and can be characterized in lots of different ways, depending on which stage of that sort of tree you're on. At the beginning, it's going to tend towards much more administration. So emails, correspondence with people, checking cover copy and proofs, scheduling, data processing. And then the further up you get, they're going to be more and more, there'll be more and more focused on personal relationships and more talk about kind of business management stuff. So, meeting a literary agent for a coffee, talking to authors about their edits, discussing sales forecasts or profitability, and that's essentially the journey that you go through on that process. The key thing for most people about being an editor is at the beginning, you're supporting someone else on their list of books, and you move towards the autonomy of choosing what to publish. But the point that I guess I most want to make to you about that, even at its most admin heavy when it's an entry level position, is I've always found it incredibly stimulating and exciting and fun. So for example, like a classic admin task is you might have to get your favorite author to sign copies of their new book. But that means that obviously aside from like ordering the books and getting them into a room and getting pens and stuff, which is all kind of like, you get to spend maybe an hour with her and hang out with her while she's signing the books, and that's really cool. And obviously she signs one for you too. And then, over the course of time, maybe you commission someone who becomes your new favorite author or becomes someone else's new favorite author. And that's the kind of distinction. All I can really say is I've been here doing it for over a decade, and I'm somewhere in the middle of that journey, and I have loved basically every minute of it. So that's that. Who's it for? So being an editor is really sort of quite strange, multifaceted, bit of a weird job, because it's really multidisciplinary and editor needs lots of different skills. So I just like off the top of my head, you need to acquire books. You've got to be kind of endlessly curious about people and their reading habits. You need some entrepreneurial skills because it's a business and you have to be competitive and negotiate a good deal to get a book. To edit, you've got to be able to really listen to an author and prioritize their voice above your own. You need a really keen eye for detail, and you've got to be as passionate about language and storytelling as they are. To publish well, you've got to be a tireless advocate for your author's work. You've got to be ruthlessly organized. You've got to deal well with the pressure of a continuously varied workload. You've got to deliver to deadline, and what you deliver has to be accurate as well as on time. You've got to communicate flawlessly in a wide variety of situations. So on the page, in email, but on that book cover copy, and in one-to-one meetings with an author or an agent in person, or in a public presentation to potentially hundreds of people, like is going on now. And I guess the things I sort of thought generally about this is quite a lot of this is contradictory. Many people think being an editor is about reading quietly with a red pencil, and you do that, but it's really also a lot about dealing with people and about networking. So a negative way to look at this is that it's very demanding and it's very unlikely that you'll be the best at every part of the job. A positive way to look at this is that because there's such an enormous variety of skills required, there are many, many ways to be an editor and many, many ways to succeed. So the one thing I guess I would say is that to be a fiction editor above absolutely everything else, the one thing you have to have is you have to love reading. You are going to have to read a lot. Like I wake up in the morning and have a cup of tea and I'm reading. I go to sleep at night and before I go to bed, I'm reading. I sometimes if you've got to meet a deadline, you read on the bus or you read in the queue at the supermarket, or I might have even read on the toilet. So basically, if you don't like to read, you probably shouldn't be a fiction editor because you're going to have to do a lot of reading. But publishing is for everyone, and whatever subject you're passionate about, I guarantee you that the publishing industry exists around that subject somewhere. Illustrated books for toddlers, or the Match Annual for football fans, or whatever. So whatever personality you have, there is a job for you that could use your skills in some way, shape, or form. And if what I've said doesn't sound like you, then I hope, editorial isn't the only job, and I hope you'll discover some of the others over the course of these talks this week. I was asked to talk a bit about the joys and challenges of the job, and I realized quite quickly that sort of this is a bit philosophical, but basically every time I thought about what the joys were, there was a kind of associated challenge. So like one of the things I love is that the job's really different and stimulating and endlessly varied. No two books are the same. I work on different books all the time. But the other side of that is that, it can be relentless and endless, and you can never kind of complete everything. And, it's really fast paced, and that can be very tiring, and it takes over your life. And so in the end, whatever joy there is, there's a kind of corresponding challenge, and whatever challenge there is a kind of corresponding joy. The important thing, I guess, for me is that if meaningful work is about producing something that human beings need, publishing does fulfill that goal. Human beings want stories, and I believe that books can expand our capacity to think and to feel. And so they're one of the best technologies humanity's invented to give people a sense of purpose and pleasure. And sometimes you can publish a book that wouldn't have been published without you, and you can see, and I have seen, genuinely life-changing effects on people. So on the author, obviously, but also on readers. And the books you publish can change the culture, and they can change the conversation. And so the fact that you can see the genuine effect of your meaningful work makes it a really amazing career. And I guess actually the other thing I'd add is that writers, obviously by definition, are like amazing, articulate, incredibly thoughtful, open-hearted, generous, sort of brilliant, creative people. So you're kind of always working with really cool people, which is a good thing too. So I just wanted to finish with a couple of other things I guess I wish I'd known a little bit. So one piece of advice I give is, I hear from people all the time that they think publishing is a great career if they want to be a writer. It's a kind of stepping stone in that way. I think if you're wanting to write your own book, there are editors who do write as well. But I can tell you that you'll have to work incredibly hard in your life as an editor, and you'll have your head full of other people's voices, and you'll be obligated to prioritize those voices. And basically, I don't know where you'd find the time. Some people do it, but I think you should think really hard before you go into publishing as a route to becoming a writer. And as an editor, you're always subservient to the author's wishes for their book, really. It's their name on the cover. So if you want your name on the cover, I think you should maybe take a different career path. Second piece of advice, basically, I would say publishing is tricky to get into. So consider taking any job that you can that gets you closer to the thing that you want, but try and think really hard about what kind of books you love. So if you can get as close to publishing the kind of material that you love, that will make everything better. You don't have to get like a hole-in-one first time, and your taste will change over time. But it's worth considering taking a job that isn't perfect to get you closer, but it's maybe not worth taking a job that isn't anywhere near the thing that you want to do. I hope that makes sense. The final thing is pay. Loads of chat about publishing and pay. Obviously, I realize, we all have to work for money. We have to work to live. And there's a lot that is said about publishing being badly paid. And I started on £18,000 in 2008 in London. And I'm not going to make out that it was a barrel of laughs at the beginning. It's better now. But publishing isn't sort of typically brilliantly paid in the early years. So you are going to need a lot of love, to do this job at the beginning. But I guess I wanted to end on the point that there is progress, because a lot of people sort of don't talk about that. And, I earn more than the London average salary now. And if you're a really successful fiction editor, and you stick at the job, for 15 years, 20 years, you have a career and you work for a big publisher and you're good at it and you make the company money, you could earn a serious salary, a six-figure salary. And I don't say that to promise kind of flying unicorns and nonsense, but I want people to know that it is possible to reach a point where you can have a job that you're passionate about, where you do meaningful work that also makes it viable to live a good life on a better than average salary in, you know, in London, if that's where you need to be. So that's the last thing I wanted to say. Thanks.
Chris, thank you so much. That was absolutely terrific. And I really, you know, you managed to cram in an awful lot of really useful kind of advice and perspectives there. And I was particularly pleased to hear you say what you did about the different ways you can be a good editor, because I think you're absolutely right. It's actually a little bit the same as you know, no two literary agents are the same. You know, no one has the full package, and there's lots of different personality types and mixes of skills which can be made a success of. So yeah, I think that was well said, sir. Thank you very much. We will let you mute and stop your video now, and I will invite Carol Tonkinson to be our second editorial guest. So Carol, who is something of a renowned hitmaker in the nonfiction world, has been at Pan Macmillan for a little while, and you will know her work from such bestsellers as Joe Wicks and Russell Brand, Pinch of Nom, which has been a most phenomenal success. And she's got something really interesting coming out with Porna Bell, which I think is hopefully she'll tell us a little bit about if we have time. Now, Carol and I, we're going to do this in a slightly different format. We're going to sort of be in conversation slightly, are we not, Carol?
We are, and I'm glad, because Chris said so much of what I wanted to say. So hopefully we won't be doubling up for you all. But yeah,
I'm sure we won't.
Yeah, really glad to be here, and so glad you're all interested in publishing, and you know, hope some of you decide to join publishing, because we definitely need new blood, new perspectives, new ideas, new thoughts.
Absolutely. Now let's start at the beginning. Carol, I'm sure we'll sort of talk about your kind of career as we go through, but let's start on a kind of a general question. So non-fiction, you know, when we say non-fiction, some people, you know, like a history book might pop into their mind. For somebody else, it might be, you know, a memoir. But I think I'm right in saying that one of the things that attracted you to non-fiction as a sort of a career path is the sheer variety. So maybe you can say a little bit about that.
Sure. I mean, I love reading novels, and you know, that's what I read on holiday, but I love publishing nonfiction because it's bringing information to people that they need. And that information can be, you know, there's educational publishing, which I know we're not talking about here specifically, but you know, dictionaries, all that stuff. My assistant came from Oxford University Press. You know, that there are a lot of skills you get in that sort of arena that are relevant. Nonfiction can be, you know, a history book that takes 7 years to research. It can be a TV tie-in book that's largely illustrated. It could be a cookery book. It could be children's nonfiction. It could be, you know, it could be any kind of an advice book. So it's really broad. It could be a, you know, an annual. And I think that that's what I really enjoy, is that we are not just getting books to people who are literary, who go to bookshops. The kind of nonfiction I specialize in is about information that people need and that they find helpful. And it might be getting off, you know, dealing with substance misuse, like Russell Brand's book. You know, it could be a book about creativity. It could be connecting with nature. It could be how to be, you know, how to be a better parent, how to wean your baby. So lots of kind of information that applies to everybody. And I think publishing is more and more open to those kinds of books now, which is why we need all kinds of readers. People are interested in all kinds of, today, for example, my team, we all took for a meeting, we all looked at TikTok. We looked at one different subject area in TikTok, and we tried to find out, what are people saying? What are the creators there? You know, what's happening? And it's a really exciting place to have a conversation. So the people I'm working with, unlike Chris, who's talked about writers, I mean, we just published a book by Jay Blades. He's the guy who's on The Repair Shop, who's the presenter there. He has dyslexia. He can't write, so we paired him with a ghostwriter, you know, and he told his story to him. You know, it took a long time. He put all this work into it. It's fantastic, but it's a way to give a voice maybe to people who don't think of themselves as writers or would never dream of writing a book, but they're great at cooking, or they have a skill set. So that's the kind of nonfiction that I publish, and I find that so exciting. We published, Pinch of Nom. It's, sold so well everywhere outside of London. This stuff can travel. Some of it can be international. Yeah.
Can you tell us a bit about Pinch of Nom, just for some people might not be familiar?
Sure. Yeah, you might not have heard of them. I wonder if your parents or older relatives have, but they are these two women in the Wirral who went to a Slimming World meeting. One of them is a chef, and the other one, they ran a restaurant together. They're a couple, and they needed to, they wanted to shed some pounds. One of their sisters was really getting on their case, and they went and they thought, oh, these recipes are terrible. And they said, we could do better. We could make healthier recipes, lower calorie, but still tasting great. And they started sharing them amongst a few people who came there. And before you know it, they built a Facebook group that had 1.6 million people when we signed them up, and they wanted to do a cookbook. They thought they might self-publish, which is a route people go, but they, luckily, I think for them, found an agent, and she introduced them to some publishers, and that we met them and thought they're amazing. The recipes are fantastic. They know their audience. They've been talking to the people who use their recipes. They talk 3 times a day, breakfast, lunch, and dinner. And so they really know what those people need and want, and they deliver it. And that's what gives them pleasure. Now, for us, we could perform a helpful role because, we know how to, photograph books. We take, we rent a studio and the best food photographer and a whole team of people to pick the props and art direct. And so it's a really creative, interchange, and also printing the book and making sure it's the right price and size. And actually, the first book that we published with them broke records. It was the fastest selling nonfiction title in British book publishing history, and it's gone on to sell 1.6 million copies since March 2019. So they had this huge audience as committed fans, and we knew there'd be more people like that who were never going to find them on Facebook. But if we could get those recipe books into Costco and Asda and Waterstones and those places, so we were able to help them grow their reach. People are very helped by the recipes. Families love them, and they've just gone on and on to success. And in that case, it was a really fierce auction. Like Chris said, we offered, like 2 hours after meeting them, they were actually in another publishing house at the time that we made the offer. We made a high offer, so they left the other publishing house, thank goodness for us. So that's one very non-literary kind of story. So you don't have to be bookish. You've got to have a passion for something. It could be anything. It could be sport, music, just really knowing a subject and having passion can be a brilliant asset in nonfiction. It's a great way to come into publishing if you're not from like a publishing, you don't need to know anybody. You don't need to have a family member. Somebody I worked with, she was young and she just called George Best up and, got to do his autobiography. She had the idea. She thought it was the right time. She figured out how to make it happen. So definitely want to encourage you, if you have those sorts of aspirations, to feel invited.
There's so much in that story of the Pinch of Nom, Carol, which I think is really illuminating, and I love that you point out that people don't have to be bookish. It's not all about kind of sitting there crafting the perfect phrase or whatever. There's elements of sort of entrepreneurialism there, being tuned into the culture, actually caring about the impact of your books in the world, which you so obviously do. I would also say that I'm really glad that you mentioned cookbooks, because I personally think that everyone that works in publishing should try to find the opportunity to go to a photo shoot for a cookbook, because it is the most fascinating thing, isn't it? It's where publishing is almost like a TV show or whatever, because you've got all these different skilled people doing this extraordinary work under time pressure. It's a really extraordinary moment. But tell us a little bit about your route to where you to how you got to here. Where did you start in publishing?
I started on $12,000 a year, Chris Doyle. So I'll raise you on the low salary. I started out. I thought I wanted to be a university lecturer in English, and I found it was very removed from what people really wanted and needed. And I then thought, no, I'm going to work in books or magazines where real people are looking for information. So I worked at a children's publisher because I took the first job somebody offered me because I just couldn't believe someone wanted to pay me, and that I could get a job. So that I would, yeah, maybe now you have to do that. Back then it was a bit rash. And then I decided to go into magazines, which was really useful. It really helped me work to deadlines. It was very trend oriented. It's very entrepreneurial. And that was great training. I loved it. And then I became interested in specific things like mindfulness and stuff. And I worked at a specialist magazine there. And then I did my own couple of books and moved to England with my husband, and a UK publisher published one of them, and then I got a job offer. But it can be much simpler, So basically, English language skills were helpful to me. They're always helpful in publishing. As Chris says, every letter that goes out from a publishing company, you don't want it to have errors in there. So pay attention to your CV, brush up on your grammar. It's totally worth it. That's the basis. But, there's still plenty of room. You don't have to love, high literature. You can love telly and create brilliant books,
Sure.
from it. Yeah.
Don't be that person that occasionally you get a kind of a very, very highfalutin publisher who claims never to watch television. I always find that rather unimpressive, I have to say. But since you mentioned skills, what are the other kind of important skills and aptitudes do you think you need for a career in non-fiction publishing?
Yeah, I mean, I think Chris touched on this in terms of the variety of skills because there are different roles. So if you're an introvert who loves detail and who wants to just pour over books and make sure that the recipe says 5 tablespoons, not 5 teaspoons, we need you. I've been there. I did that once on a recipe card at Elle magazine, which was not good. So, detail really counts. And it's a good skill set to have if you ever want to go freelance. Being a great copy editor and proofreader is something you can do anywhere. You can do it for medical journals, legal journals. It's a great way to know you've got a way to make a living. And it's really important. And I think, there's room for specialisms there too. So that's the kind of detailed self-starter who likes to work by themselves. That's the copy editor, desk editor route, that proofreader route. And the other one is going more commissioning, which Chris touched on. I would say great communication, being able to collaborate with people, not being afraid to pick up the phone, so sort of a bit more outgoing. You don't have to be a massive extrovert and like to party, but you have to really be so passionate about your ideas that you will call, you will reach out to people to give you a quote for the book, to give you an endorsement to help your author reach the public. You're the bridge between this author's hard work and readers who can be helped by it. So you have to be willing to go the distance, to sometimes it means, working out of hours. It means going to, an author event. It means, you're committed to this, role. So I think that passion and commitment, it's not just a 9-to-5 job for sure. If you want to be a commissioner, you're going to be looking up trends. You're going to be really curious. Curiosity, I would say, is the top skill. What else? Yeah, I think curiosity, a love of books, communication, and great language skills.
Yeah, absolutely. Do you think, is it possible that a publishing job can kind of like kill your love of reading? Because or indeed make it, maybe it's a downside that you can never switch off because you'll be
it's so true. Sunday morning I read the paper and then I'm like, oh, this is a good idea and we should ask this person for that, and oh, this is an interesting trend. And you know, but it's also so fantastic because, you know, you might see something and have a spark of an idea, and then a book can come out of that. And that's such a satisfying feeling. So, I mean, I'm happy I don't work in fiction because it doesn't ruin my love of reading. I can read a novel and just bask in it and enjoy it and not have to judge it and think of there already been 3 novels that have dealt with this theme published this year. In nonfiction, the reason I chose to go into that is partly because it's got a mission to help people in a really specific and obvious way, as opposed to a novel inspiring someone. You know, all books help people, I think, but in nonfiction, it's giving people what they need. I'm committed to mental health. I love publishing books that help people with their mental health. But also, I like being able to research the market. I can know, oh, we shouldn't do the 18th book on, you know, I don't know, a trend like hygge, which is the Scandinavian trend. You know, when 15 books have been, you know, that's done. So you can use metrics, you can measure the size of audiences, you can look at what's the engagement like on this creator's Instagram page. You know, do people really want to know more from this, or is Instagram enough? You can use a lot of your analysis and critical judgment to understand if it's a marketable proposition. Whereas with fiction, I think it's much more a question of taste, and some beautiful books sometimes don't, you know, struggle to find their readership for, you know, mysterious reasons. But in our kind of nonfiction, we have so many different levers, you know, be on trend, be quick, be clever second, you know, pick up on a trend, but be better with the second book, you know, make it beautiful, use color perhaps, you know. So we've got a lot of different levers.
It's interesting that you mention, you use the word analytical, and I think that's a really key one, isn't it? Because a successful nonfiction editor has to have some element of that kind of analytical thinking. And you know, if you didn't have a passion for the subject, you probably couldn't just do it by the numbers, could you? You know, there's no algorithmical way to, you know, to consistently create successful books. But on the other hand, some element of, you know, crunching the numbers and kind of like trying to apply data and be a little bit more empirical. So that is an element to most nonfiction thinking, isn't it?
Definitely. And, you know, and it's, you know, and that feels really, you know, it gives us a nice platform and foundation. When I go into an acquisition meeting to argue for a book, I can say, well, you know, we've seen this, you know, whatever, DIY is a trend. 7 million people watch The Repair Shop. You know, people love Jay Blades. You know, you know, so we can make a reasonable case. And you're not always right. Nobody's right, but you can be right a lot of the time. And it's not about just persuading someone of your own, a single person's opinion. It's often a collective effort, and I love that about nonfiction, because we work hand in hand with our marketing and publicity colleagues. We almost think it through together, and same with sales. Even when we're going to acquire a book, we think, where is this going to sell? Is this going to be in 2 supermarkets? Do we think we can get this into, you know, Oliver Bonus? Is this a book that we can get, you know, beyond, you know, high street bookshops? So it's a really fun, energized, it's not a lonely route to be in commercial trade nonfiction. It can be really fun and buzzy, and, you know, keeps me feeling connected to the world.
Yeah, I think that's a really nice way of looking at it. And it's sort of, I mean, you know, we could all go off and be, I don't know, foreign exchange traders or estate agents or whatever, and probably make more money faster or whatever. But actually being engaged, finding a way of being engaged with the world, being to some degree in, you know, the national conversation is actually quite an exciting thing to do. And I love what the way you're describing the collaboration as well. And I think that probably shows that as a successful nonfiction editor, particularly as you become senior, you're collaborating, but you're also leading, aren't you? You're persuading your colleagues, and you're kind of helping bring people together in the service of a goal, and that's a really exciting thing to do, isn't it?
It is. I love the job. You know, it's just been so much fun. I've met people have opened my mind. You know, I've sat next to people at like a concert who tell me they've read a book that has changed their life. You know, you have those moments a lot, and it's really you know, so rewarding. You know, especially now we get to see what readers think because they DM authors, they leave Amazon reviews. You know, it's almost like instant feedback, and you can learn from that. Oh, I wish there were more pictures in this book. You know, so we have many new opportunities to refine what we're publishing and make it better. And that's also fun because, you know, it's hard to stand out, but we have a lot more ways to get feedback to help us stand out.
Yeah, absolutely. Carol, thank you so much. That's a fantastic
Sure.
insight into non-fiction editorial careers. Now, if you'd like to, please do stop your video and mute so that we can let you go. And then I'll ask Grace and Kaltoon to kindly start their videos and unmute. And then the challenge is with me to start sharing my screen in a competent manner. Let's see if I can manage that. Because we have slides, do we not? Do we want to start on this one? No, we want to start on that one, don't we? Yes. Can you both hear me?
Yeah.
Fantastic. Right. So yeah, you two are coming at us from two different parts of the children's editorial team at Pan Macmillan. So I will leave it to you to tell us a little bit more about what you do, and shout at me when you want me to change the slide.
Sure. Hi everyone, my name is Kaltoon. I currently work in children's editorial as an editor on the Pitch Fix team. I started in as an editorial assistant 4 years ago here at PanMac. So today I'm going to talk to you a little bit about what to expect from an entry-level role. This is mainly reflective of my previous role at PanMac Children, so I hope it's general enough to be useful insight for most editorial assistant jobs. So the day-to-day picture of the job is quite admin heavy. It's a supportive role primarily, so you'll need to be fairly organized. You might be minuting meetings like covers, or going to an acquisition meeting where projects get greenlit and signed off, creative meetings where new submissions from agents are discussed, and going to scheduling meetings and things like that. You might be also required to sort out things like sales material, which basically enable our sales teams to kind of best sell our books. But you might be managing reprints, working with design and production. You might be filling out metadata for titles on our central system. We use Biblio. This is the sort of information that you as a customer would see on Waterstones and Amazon about a book. You might also be putting together slides for launch where titles are presented to reps who are going to be selling our books, and prepping for book fairs where, I mean, there are three that we have, the main ones each year: London, Frankfurt, and Bologna. Bologna is really important for children's. These fairs are where publishing houses from all over the globe come together for business. And then you also do sort of the really glamorous things like royalty payments and invoicing processing invoices and organising publication day gifts and doing a lot of mail outs. And yeah, so, and then there's the sort of fun part. So when you're an editorial assistant, you're not completely shut out from the kind of editorial process. Alongside all of those responsibilities I previously listed, you also get the opportunity to work directly with sort of the more creative stuff that helps with your development as an editor. So I had editors that I shadowed and helped them with certain projects, which allowed me to kind of delve into that the process from like submission through to pre-acquisition, and then all the way to printing and then finally publication. This was quite fun to see a project through each stage. You kind of have regular catch-ups where you talk kind of creatively, and you know, you might be asked to kind of feedback on kind of the first edits or look at the layouts, and you know, the editors are really kind of receptive to your comments, even though they're kind of mainly sort of like heading it. And then also you get the opportunity to sort of sit in with meetings with agents and authors and illustrators. You might be doing draft blurbs and things. So it's kind of really good. It's the really good bit of the job that kind of allows you to sort of see whether or not this is something that you would actually want to consider doing. After that is, I guess, a junior editor role. Here we call it an assistant editor. You would do some administrative tasks here, but the editorial elements definitely increase. You're more responsible for sort of like secondary formats and looking after those would be like board books in children's or paperbacks in children's. So primarily you would publish a hardback in the beginning, and that would be frontlist, and then the next year you do a paperback. So as an editorial as an assistant editor, you would be looking after that book. So even though there's slightly less pressure as there is not as much editing, it's a definite wonderful opportunity to kind of flex some of those project management skills that you would have learned when shadowing, and you also get to hear work with design and production kind of more substantially, also finding out what kind of covers work, which ones don't, how the different sales teams think, and then you also might be sort of like presenting at launch and things like that, and also just interacting with agents and illustrators kind of more substantially here too. And then the bit that I liked also was, I think that part of the job helped you also kind of figure out what your tastes are and what your preferences are, because you're sort of supporting kind of a wider range of editors at this level, and sort of seeing which bits that you like of the job. So now I'm going to hand over to my lovely colleague Grace, who's going to talk a little bit more about what the job is like beyond kind of assistant level.
Thanks, Catherine. Yes, hi everyone, I'm Grace and I'm a senior editor for picture books at MCB. So now Catherine sort of outlined the entry level sort of tasks you might be doing. I'm going to try and talk about what your day-to-day might look like when you're, say, 3 or so years into an editorial job. So maybe once you're an editor or assistant editor even, you could still be doing this sort of thing. So James, if you could shift onto that slide, you'll see a rough visual of where I've pulled out some of the main stages of making a picture book. And I'll just talk through each one, because at any one time, you'll probably be doing this for various books. So the first thing is costing. You can see that lovely grid full of numbers. One preconception that I know I had when I started out in publishing, and specifically editorial, was that it would be a wholly sort of words-based thing. But no, the first stage of any book is always to make the business case for it. Basically, you know, you have to prove that it's going to make money before you're allowed to invest in the text. So don't be, I mean, there's no hard maths involved at all. And don't be put off if, like me, you thought you'd left maths behind at GCSE. It's, you know, it's perfectly manageable. And actually it's an example, I guess Chris was saying earlier, that there are all different kinds of editors. There are so many different skills involved, and the numbers, the costing, the working out, you know, what the profit's going to be for that book is a part that I don't think people necessarily know about, but it's a really fascinating thing when you get your head around to kind of understand the commercial nature of it. And editors do get, you know, you have to be involved in that as well as the editing, which is the next thing. And it's pretty obvious, and I think probably the part that from the outside is the best understood. So this is all, I should say, relating to illustrated children's books, picture books, which is what me and Cartoon specialise in. So usually we start off with a Word doc, and the type of editing that we would do would range from, you know, a complete restructure to just a really basic line edit. A more intense edit for a picture book might mean maybe adding in more dialogue, or it could be changing the perspective. Maybe you're shifting from the third person to the first person if you think it maybe could do with being a bit more immediate. And I would say editing skills-wise definitely requires people skills. I know Chris has already mentioned this, because it's so important to get a feel for your author's style. You really need to understand what they're trying to get across and really sensitively frame what they're doing, because you know you're just trying to, you're all trying to get the same outcome. You want to make their book as good as it can possibly be, but you know, authors are all different. Some love being edited and really relish kind of collaborating with an editor, and some, you know, really don't. They don't welcome feedback. So, you know, it takes all kinds of authors to create all kinds of books. So I would say in terms of the skills, diplomacy and tact are absolutely key about working out, you know, how you're going to get the best out of someone and their work. And another part of editing, which I found fascinating when I first started, was thinking about the markets that you're selling into. We often sell our books internationally, picture books, because they're so expensive to produce. We often have to build really big print runs, which means that we often print copies for different countries at the same time. And so we often make small edits to avoid alienating any of our very many customers across the world. So a recent example of that would be I'm working on a picture book at the moment about a girl who loves bugs. And at one point in the story, she brings all the bugs she's collected inside and hides them in her room. And there's a line about her hiding spiders in socks, which our export director pointed out that we should take out, because this book has, you know, they're hoping to sell it into Australia. That's one of the key markets for our picture books. And over there, the idea of spiders in socks is quite horrifying, given how many poisonous spiders there are. So that's something I'm looking at now, how to kind of skew the mention of spiders to keep this text feeling relevant. So there's all sorts of kind of angle to come at editing, and it's always fascinating to kind of understand. It just gives you a lovely insight into what kind of works around the world. And then once you're happy with the text and you've had it copy edited and proofread, and I'll just quickly say what the difference is, because I think someone asked that as a question. Actually, for picture books, we wouldn't have a specific phase for copy editing and proofreading, because the text is so short. It's much more, Chris and Carol would use it much more than we do. And I hope I give the right definition, but I believe that copy editing is more involved. A copy editor, as well as correcting, you know, spelling and grammar, they might make small tweaks to the sentence structure, or maybe the word order, just to make sure it's flowing really well, but always kind of keeping in mind the author's voice and trying not to, you know, change that. Proofreading always happens, is the very last thing that happens before the book goes to print. So it's catching the very, very final things. You usually will pick up less in a proofread. And it might just be a missing speech mark, or, you know, something, a book title should be italicized. So really tiny things, and to check that once the book's been typeset, nothing's been sort of thrown off. So yes, once we've got a really lovely text, we then find an illustrator, which is the part that I think working on illustrated books, it just makes it so special. It's so much fun. Because obviously for an illustrated book, the art is at least as key as the text in terms of, you know, bringing the book to life. So a huge part of a picture book editor's job is finding the perfect illustrator. And as the editor, you're in a really privileged position, because, you know, you're the one who's kind of collating all those options as illustrator, and you have a huge kind of sway over what the visuals are going to be for the book. So in non-COVID times, sorry, there's a train going past outside, I hope it's not too loud. In non-COVID times, we spend a lot of time going to illustration shows, browsing places like Paper Chase or like stationery shops, magazines, etc. for illustrators. Increasingly, we use Instagram to try and find them too. And obviously we do have relationships with agents, of course, who are, you know, always sending us amazing people. And so yeah, that's a really key part. And I think if you're a visual person, or you have any interest in art or design, picture books is an incredibly rewarding place to be, because there's so much scope for you to contribute creatively to a project in picture books. And then once the illustrator is signed up, they will do the roughs, which is usually just pencil sketches. The first time that we kind of get to see the book come together, which is another just brilliant thing when you get a file from an illustrator, and you just kind of see their vision of the story come to life. And sometimes it's, you know, exactly in line with your vision, sometimes it's completely different and much better. Of, you know, they're professionals, they know exactly what they're doing, and it's just, that's a complete joy. And then the next thing is just getting the final art in. And at this stage, we have to get the cover approved by the sales teams and that sort of thing. So definitely another thing to note, and I know this is sort of reiterating again what Chris said, but once you've kind of finished the solitary creative part, where you're just, you know, you're editing, you're kind of in your own head, you're doing it, a lot of it, there is collaboration throughout actually with picture books. You're always collaborating with author, illustrator and designer, but there is also a much more sort of extrovert sort of necessity, because once you've finished the actually making of the book, as the editor, you then have to pitch it to the sales teams, make sure they know exactly what it is, who it's for, so that they kind of get infected with your enthusiasm and they sell it in brilliantly. So like, for example, as Kaltun said, you'll be presenting at launch meetings. So it's always, I think it's a really good thing. And being an editor isn't just about sort of hiding away making the book. You also have to really champion them when the time comes. So it definitely helps if you can summon up a bit of an extrovert facade at points. So that was very, very quick sort of overview of all the things that me and Cartoon kind of do day to day, which I hope gives you an idea of how varied and it honestly is just the most fun job. I always feel really lucky that we get to just, you know, look at pictures all day and read stories. It's very wonderful. And I also would say, because James mentioned, do you ever get sick of, does it destroy the joy of reading? That's why I went into children's, because I did an internship at a literary agency where I was just reading submission after submission. And I was just like, I'm never going to read a you know, not a real book, but a fiction book in the same way. And so I swerved, and I'm so pleased that I moved into children's, because I'm still in that amazing world of wonderful books. But children's is sort of, you know, it's a different angle, and I can't recommend it enough.
Fantastic. Thank you both. That was absolutely tremendous. Did you have any other, Kaltuna? You look like you had more to say there.
I was just going to say something about the challenges and joys, but I mean,
perfect. Perfect. Yeah, do go for it.
I was just going to say that one of the kind of like challenges that you might find in publishing in editorial anyway is kind of the stuff that has already been sort of said, which is like, you can't publish every book, and that sometimes you might work really, really hard on a pitch and then you guys just don't win it, or that, you know, the book that you really, really want just has a better home. And because it's, I don't know, maybe it's too similar to something that's already on your list, and it's kind of just like learning how to kind of let go of those projects and imagining yourself working on them. And then also kind of like, for me anyway, one of the challenges was kind of coming into a very white and very like middle class kind of industry. And I think for anyone that's kind of looking at entry level roles, you should, I know that there aren't that many, but like you should definitely kind of look at what a publishing house is doing. I mean, it's definitely better than when it was when I first started applying, but I wouldn't discount kind of what their sort of diversity initiatives are when you are applying, because I think with any role, you want to make sure that you feel like you can be supported and can thrive there, especially in the kind of junior stages. And then the joys, I think for me, there are two: kind of working really collaboratively with everybody. That's been a real sort of like, help. You know, there is a real team that's behind every single book. And then I guess I can say at the end of the day that like I can physically hold the thing that I've been working on. There is something that is produced, something that's tangible. I can say, you know, that there was this was a seed in somebody's brain, and now, you know, here are my contributions, and it's a really satisfying kind of thing to be able to do. And then also like, keep, basically when you're looking at entry level jobs, to keep open-minded, because I didn't know that I wanted to work in like, I knew I wanted to work in children's publishing, but I didn't know I wanted to work in picture books. And like working on the visual sort of storytelling side of things has been a real kind of joy to discover. And so even if you don't know if something might be the right fit for you, it's worth, if you're even a little bit interested, going for it. So yeah, that's all I have to say.
Thank you both so much. That was an absolutely superb summary of the joys and the challenges, and an exploration of all the wonderful things about children's picture book editorial. So thank you so much. That was absolutely terrific. And Grace, thank you for squeezing in that thing about copy editors and proofreaders. Yes, that's always confused me a little bit. So good to actually get a decent explanation of that. So thank you very much indeed to all the speakers. That was absolutely wonderful. I hope everyone in the audience enjoyed that and got something from it. I'd be kind of amazed if you didn't. So that brings to a close our editorial section, although quite a lot of the stuff that we've been talking about today will kind of come up in previous, in succeeding sessions. Tomorrow, we're looking at how we promote books, as I said, so sales, marketing, and publicity, which are sort of interrelated fields and really, really interesting. And, you know, they are the people that actually take these wonderful books, which the editorial teams create and lead, and they take them out to the market. So I think that'll be a really interesting next stage for you. Do remember to ask any questions you like on Slido, or vote for anybody else's questions, and do read those 3 book documents that we sent you. I think you're going to get sent an extra one, sort of like a reminder email again. So that, I think, brings us to a close. Thank you very much indeed, everyone, and we will see you at 5 o'clock tomorrow. All right. Goodbye.